Okay, guys. Well, welcome everybody to another Tuesday live training. And today's topic, what are we going to talk about today? It's one that's very near and dear to my own heart. Today's lesson is going to be all about vulnerability and the role that it plays. Well, I suppose not only in our system, but in our lives and in the lives of our clients. Vulnerability, it affects all of us at some stage, in some form. It affects each and every one of us. I know myself, I'm very, very guilty. I've struggled with it for years. But yeah, I really do believe it affects us all, and it's a really, really important topic, something that we need to address, especially again, like when we're working with clients, and for our own benefits as well. So, what does it mean? Well, I went on to dictionary.com. I want to get a very clear definition. And believe it or not, there's about 4 or 5 definitions, all basically the same. But the one that I like the best, I suppose, is a willingness to show emotion or to allow one's weakness to be seen or known. Willingness to risk being hurt or attacked. And I like the way they use it in the sentence. The foundation for an open communication consists of honesty, trust, and vulnerability. So, how does it affect us? How does it affect all of us? Well, to me, how it affected me was always in the form of being judged or criticized. Even today, like I even caught myself there just recently, as recently as yesterday. Yesterday, I met some family members of mine that I haven't seen for a while, and yeah, of course, you don't see people. You're making conversation, you're talking, but these are guys that I know really well, cousins of mine, but cousins that I grew up with, and they're asking, yeah, so what are you doing over in Ireland? And it's funny. I just caught myself. I didn't want to really get into the whole personal development side of things. I just said, oh, well, I'm just doing a bit of consulting. And afterwards, I'm thinking about it and I'm like, why wouldn't I kind of say what I'm doing? Even though, yeah, I didn't lie. It is consulting and I do consulting with businesses as well. But I didn't really go into it in detail. And I know why. It's because I felt vulnerable. Primarily, I didn't want to run the risk of being judged or criticized. Because again, I know these are guys that I grew up, and these guys have known me my whole life. And again, yeah, you know how young guys are and everything else. They kind of give each other, a hard time over things. And I didn't want anybody judging me, saying, who does he think he is? Who's he to give advice to anybody? Or so it was just easier for me just to say, oh, I'm just doing a bit of consulting. But again, it all came from that feeling of the fear, I suppose, of being judged or criticized, not even so much to my face, but what people would say behind my back. And I thought about it afterwards. And I thought, yeah, here I'm planning a lesson, and here I am. I'm a victim of it myself. But it's something that it's not the first time. It's happened to me many times, and it still does, obviously. So, and I'm sure it happens to you. It might not be in that format, but I guarantee you, if you look deep, you always feel vulnerable. You always feel you don't want somebody judging you or criticizing you, and it might not be in that particular instant. It might be something as far as your health. It might be something to do with your finances. It might be something to do, with your relationships, whatever the case may be. But it affects us all. So I just thought it'd be a really good topic to kind of get into today a little bit. Everybody, all the people we study, they all talk about it. Mel Robbins, vulnerability is a strength. Very true. Tony Robbins does a whole audio program on it. But even the likes of Sigmund Freud, We are never so vulnerable as when we love. But even going to the late, great Bob Marley, being vulnerable is the only way to allow your heart to feel true pleasure. So there's a lot of people that talk about the subject. But today, what I want to do is I want to focus on one particular, Brene Brown. Many consider the queen of vulnerability. Now, I'm not sure how much you know about her or how much you don't, but she's been around for a long time. She's considered an expert in vulnerability. She's actually wrote a really, really good book called The Power of Vulnerability. And she studies it. She's a professor, she's a lecturer, she's an author. She's written quite a few books. But I have to admit, and this is probably not the best reflection on me personally, but for a long time, I wasn't a fan. I wasn't a fan of hers. And I don't know why, truthfully. I don't know I read her book. I listened, and this is going back years ago, and I've listened to a lot of her stuff. But I think, and the only thing I can kind of chalk it up to is my wife is a big, massive fan of Brene Brown. And she used to always be kind of throwing up stuff to me. But in my opinion, not in a negative way, obviously, but just, to kind of motivate me, I suppose, to take action in certain things. And she would say these sayings to me about Brene Brown. And I don't know, maybe subconsciously it registered with me. I didn't particularly care for it, or whatever the case may be. But again, for a long time, I wasn't a fan of hers. But lately, I've revisited a lot of stuff that she's done. And I have to say, I'm definitely warming up to her. I agree. I don't always agree with the way she presents. And I think that's part of it too. You know how sometimes you don't particularly, I suppose, click with somebody's presentation skills. Like I have a lot of people tell me they don't like Tony Robbins. They think he's too loud and boisterous. Again, I get that. Everybody's got their own preferences. And I don't know, maybe with Brene Brown, maybe I just didn't particularly care for her presentation skills. It just didn't resonate with me as much. But I think subconsciously it was more because of my wife, to be honest with you. Not in a negative way or anything like that. But anyway, I have revisited her stuff. It is very strong. And the more, when I look at things, I like to see how we can incorporate them into our system, how we go ahead and, validate what we're doing here. And again, always looking for any type of tools that we can use when we're working with clients. And this is actually a very strong one because, again, I don't care if it's for you or for a client, but we are all affected by some shape or form, be struggling with some type of vulnerability. So what I want to do is I want to play a TED Talk that Brene Brown did. And afterwards, I want to kind of take a look at it a little bit deeper, point out some things that she said in her talk about how they affect us, how we can, how they affect our clients, and, how we can actually just through the awareness of it, I suppose, use it when we're working with clients. So I'm going to go ahead and play this, and after we will have we'll have a chat.
So I'm going to start by walking you into a scene in a movie, and then I want y'all to tell me what happens next. Okay, here's my black. Christmas Eve. Beautiful night, light snowfall. Young family of 4 in the car on the way to Grandma's house for dinner. They're listening to the radio station, the one that starts playing the Christmas music like right at Halloween. Jingle Bells comes on, the kids in the back seat go crazy. Everyone breaks into song. The camera pans in on the faces of the kids, the mom, dad. What happens next? Car crash. 60% of people say car crash. 60%. Another 10 to 15% have equally fatalistic answers, but more creative. I have the camera cuts to the oncologist who is looking at the bad news that he's going to share the day after Christmas. They get to grandmother's house, everyone's dead, a serial killer's on the loose. And I had one dude who worked in a shark attack. I did. What's interesting to me about this, and it's an indictment a little bit of the media, which I wouldn't so much care about, except that I'm a vulnerability researcher, and I've spent the last 10 years studying vulnerability, and I cannot tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of stories that I've collected from people who that is their response, not just to media, but in their real lives. How many parents I've interviewed who will say, and I'm looking at my children and they're sleeping and I'm on this, the verge of bliss, and I picture something horrible happening. Do you know this? Yes. I get the promotion and I get to fly up to headquarters, to find out about my new job and what's going to happen. Plane crashes. The fatalistic response is not universal. We're not all like that. But it is a symptom of an issue that is both universal and, I believe, profoundly dangerous. And that is, we are losing our tolerance for vulnerability. And in our culture, what do we think is synonymous with vulnerability? Weakness. You are an excellent audience. It's almost as if I trained you. It's perfect. Weakness. And I'm going to talk about how that's not the case tonight. Vulnerability is absolutely at the core of fear and anxiety and shame and very difficult emotions that we all experience. But vulnerability is also the birthplace of joy, of love, of belonging, of creativity, of faith. And so it becomes very problematic when, as a culture, we lose our capacity to be vulnerable. So this kind of fatalistic car crash is a symptom. I refer to it as foreboding joy. One of the symptoms that we're losing our capacity for vulnerability is that joy actually becomes foreboding. Something good happens, or we're looking at someone we love, or we're thinking about something we care about, and then we become compelled to beat vulnerability to the punch. Other symptoms: disappointment as a lifestyle. It is much easier to live disappointed than it is to feel disappointment. And so this is the person in the after-school movie that, I don't want to play your stupid game because it's dumb and boring, and because really maybe nobody will ask me. We sidestep getting excited about something because we're not sure it's actually going to happen. Low-grade disconnection is another symptom of vulnerability avoidance. We go through the motions. It's like low-grade fever. It may not kill us, but it keeps us pretty miserable. Perfection is one of I call it the 200-pound shield. How can anything go wrong if my life looks like an ad? I'm going to perform and please and make sure everything's perfect. And perfectionism has nothing to do with striving for excellence and healthy. It's nothing to do with healthy striving. People who I interview who are absolutely accomplished and people who strive for excellence are the biggest negotiators and compromisers that I've ever interviewed. Perfection is a tool to protect ourselves. Extremism. There's a very simple equation. Faith minus vulnerability equals extremism. Faith is the vulnerability that flows between the shores of certainty. Faith without vulnerability, spirituality is inherently vulnerable. It is believing in things we don't understand or really can't see. And last, I believe the most universal way that we are dealing with an intolerance for vulnerability in our culture is that we numb. And I'll talk about this in a minute. Let's go to a bigger question, and that is, what is driving this intolerance for vulnerability in us? And I believe the answer is scarcity. We live in a culture that tells us that there is never enough, that we are not enough, that we are not good enough, that we are not safe enough, that we can never be certain enough, that we're not perfect enough. And maybe the one that we really don't talk about, that I think is perhaps the most dangerous, is that we are not extraordinary enough. In this world, somehow an ordinary life has become synonymous with a meaningless life. And so often we are missing what is truly important because we're on the quest for what is extraordinary. Not understanding that in our ordinary lives, in the ordinary moments of our lives, is really where we can find the most joy. One of the things that happens, I think, in our culture of scarcity is that we are constantly collecting images and messages and experiences. I think it's unconscious. I really don't think that we're aware of how many messages and images of scarcity that we collect every day. And I want to tell a story about something that happened about 6 months ago that I think really illustrates this. So I have to catch a flight to go do a talk somewhere, and my daughter's, I have a 5-year-old and an 11-year-old, and my daughter's really struggling with a school project. I am definitely in the scarcity mode. I shouldn't be going. I'm not a good enough mom. I can't balance all of this. I have to go to my bank, which is inside of a grocery store, which is, I don't know if that happens here, but in Texas, all the banks have moved inside the grocery stores. So I walk into the grocery store, sliding glass doors, and there's a big Code Adam sticker, which if you don't know what that is, it's an incredibly important program, but it's a program that says this store and its employees are trained that when a child has gone missing or nabbed, everything in the store shuts down. So I look at that and I think, oh God, okay, just stay focused, Brene. No one's going to nab your kids while you're away. I go and get my money, I get back in the car, I get on the freeway toward the airport, and I pass the Amber Alert. Keep driving, Brene, keep driving. About 2 miles past the Amber Alert, there's a sign that tells me that 39 people have been killed on that specific stretch of highway. And please wear my seatbelt. Then I get to the airport, and of course, I'm in line to security, getting naked, and I hear, the threat code has been moved to orange. And then I go through this thing that I'm like, oh my God, holy crap, is that a movement? Is it always orange? I was like, I'm going to start writing it on my hand on a Sharpie, like, it's always orange. Okay, orange is not, hasn't gone bad. I'm like, what is it? Okay, so I'm like, orange. Okay, it's orange. I think it was orange yesterday. Maybe something's happened, and I was busy reading the Amber Alert, then trying to find the license plate. So I get to my gate and I sit down and they're like, do not leave unintended baggage, and I look down and there's a bag. And I'm like, oh my God, wait, it's a diaper bag. And I know that mother is like 10 feet away chasing her kid, and I'm like, but I saw this on Law and Order. And I'm going to board that plane, and then the next thing you're going to hear is ching, ching, that Law and Order ching. And then we're blow up. So I get on the plane, and I'm really getting ready to start. I'm in kind of what you would call, I would say, an anxiety attack. So I'm having an anxiety attack, and the guy comes in. I'm flying in business class, and the guy comes in. He's sitting next to me. He turned out to be a supply chain manager consultant. And so he looks over, and he's like, you okay? I'm like, I'm good. Yeah, what's up? And my phone rings, and my son's face pops up. Well, he's 5, so that means his school's calling. Hello? Charlie's got a fever. Can you come get him? So I'm like, I text my husband, I take care of it. And the guy next to me said, really, are you okay? By this time, the cabin doors are closed. And I said, you know what? I'm good. But I'm having that thing where I can't decide whether my gut is really saying get off the flight, something's going to happen, or I'm just freaking out. And I'm trying to figure out how to do something crazy enough to get off the flight, but to not end up on the no-fly list. And so I'm a super blast to fly with. So then he said, let me get you a drink. And I said, I don't drink. And he goes, Xanax? And I was like, no, I don't do Xanax either. Which is a shame, but I don't. But then what I realized is it really makes me think about my work, because we numb vulnerability. Now, had he said chips and queso, that would have been a completely different issue. Evidence of the numbing. We are the most addicted. We are the most medicated, obese, and in debt adult cohort in human history. We're numbing. And this doesn't even include busyness. I didn't even put the busy slide up. When they start having busy recovery meetings, they'll have to, busy 12-step meetings, they'll have to rent out football stadiums. Because we just stay so busy that the truth of our lives can't catch up. That's the plan. And so what are the consequences of numbing vulnerability? What are the consequences of trying to beat vulnerability to the punch? Here's the consequence to numbing that I've learned. And as a vulnerability researcher, I've spent the first 6 years of my research studying shame, empathy, and courage, and the last 4 years studying joy, authenticity, love, and belonging. And one of the things that I learned that was very startling for me personally and everyone I've ever met is that you cannot selectively numb emotion. When we numb the dark emotion, when we numb vulnerability and fear and shame of not being good enough, we by default numb joy. We cannot selectively just numb the dark emotions. We have interesting research around this. We have research that shows us in addiction studies that an intensely positive experience is as likely to trigger relapse as an intensely negative experience. Let me tell you, if vulnerability is a sharp edge, there may be nothing sharper than joy. To let yourself soften into loving someone, to caring about something passionately, that's vulnerable. So the question becomes, how do we embrace vulnerability? And here's what I learned from the research. We practice gratitude. We stop and be thankful for what we have. I've interviewed a lot of people who have been through many horrific things, from genocide to trauma. And when you ask them what they need, they will tell you, I don't need your pity. I don't need your sympathy. When you look at your children, I need to know you're grateful. I need to know that you know what you have. So to practice gratitude, to honor what's ordinary about our lives, because that is what's truly extraordinary. We can compete with the images from the media, from the news, from the scary shows on TV, with our own images of gratitude about what's ordinary in our lives, the people we love, our kids, our family, play, our community, and nature. These are things that happen every single day that we're so busy being afraid we're missing these. So that's, I think, the biggest thing, is to be grateful for what we have, to honor what's ordinary. And last, I just want to say that, and I'm a parent and I'm a vulnerable person too, but I really believe, we want more guarantees. We want to believe we're not going to get hurt and that bad things are not going to happen, and they are. But there is a guarantee that no one talks about that, and that is that if we don't allow ourselves to experience joy and love, we will definitely miss out on filling our reservoir with what we need when those hard things happen. And so I'll end on the note that I'm grateful for your time tonight, and I'm grateful to be here. And I hope this is something that we can do together, because I believe in vulnerability we'll find what really gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully you guys got something out of that. I myself, I found it extremely interesting. Again, and I don't know why I never really clicked with her as much, except for the last, few months or whatever. But as far as the numbing, I know I'm guilty of that. When you feel vulnerable, it's a negative emotion, and you want to numb it out. Now, you might numb it out with, as she says, being busy. You might numb it out with, either food or drugs or alcohol, whatever your poison is. But it's very true what she says. And I never really thought about it as much. But you can't pick out the emotions you're numbing when you're choosing to take one of those steps through, again, either through food or alcohol, or through just being busy, or just ignoring your emotions, whatever the case may be. Yeah, maybe you might be able to numb out those negative emotions, but you're also numbing out all the positive emotions that go with it. You can't just select. But for me, I suppose it's just about getting your head around that being vulnerable, it's not a weakness. And again, I don't want to sound sexist in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if this affects men more than it does women, but it definitely affected me, definitely in my younger days, especially. But again, whenever I would feel vulnerable, I would feel very weak. And it was very negative emotion, something I didn't want to experience. But when she talks about the myth, that it's just a myth, it's very true. And it is dangerous. It really is. Society as a whole, that she puts in such a way that, losing our tolerance for vulnerability, it's very dangerous, only because, again, you're not going to experience joy, or the pleasure of happiness, all the positive emotions that you want to be experiencing. And these are things we have to look out for when we're working, yes, for ourselves, but again, for our clients as well. Because remember, that's what we're doing when we're working with clients. It's about providing solutions, and awareness is always a big thing. Trying to figure out why they're trying to avoid or trying to numb certain things out. But I thought that was really powerful. But she said a lot in there. When you really think about it, it's about a 15-minute long TED Talk. But so much of what she said in there really resonates with me, and I think what we're doing here. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. 100% true. You can't you can't create change without feeling some form of vulnerability. All the positive emotions all stem from being vulnerable at some stage. But she talked about too, and this is something you'll see quite a bit in either your own scores when you're working on your own dashboard, or you'll notice when you're working your own system, or definitely you'll come across others, because I know I've come across quite a few. Perfectionism. A lot of people use it as a shield, because again, they're trying to avoid that negative emotion. They're trying to use it as some type of a shield to prevent them. And the reality is, in my opinion, and I think in most people would tend to agree, there's no such thing as perfection. It's actually a negative emotion It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to be, wanting to achieve and, advance. But perfectionism is something different. I know there's different clients that I've worked with, and there's different clients that I'm working with right now. You can see it. You can see it in their scores, how they're always pushing themselves to extremes. And that's not healthy. And I try in a professional way to point it out. And if you haven't come across these clients yet, I guarantee you stick with it, you will. Because it becomes very obvious with their scores. And, the way they kind of beat themselves up when they don't achieve that goal that they've set for themselves, to a point where I believe a lot of it's even false. I think it's just a lot of it is, and I would never ever be comfortable enough saying it to anybody. But I think sometimes, a lot of times, people, maybe they're not 100% truthful. Like the individuals that I'm talking about, the ones who are into perfection, I'm not always confident they're being truthful with the scores they're putting in. I don't know if they're just doing it to feel better about themselves or to create an image. It's almost like social media to a degree, and this is what we have to be very aware of when we're working with clients. Like on social media with Facebook, individuals are always trying to create the image of a perfect life. They're always taking all these amazing pictures and posting, and you very seldom do you see people posting up pictures of the house being a mess or the kids acting up, or arguing with the spouse or anything like that. It's always, all these lovely, amazing, beautiful pictures, and with filters on, that they're trying to paint a picture that maybe their life really isn't what it in reality is. But she talked about there too that the risk of, I suppose, not being grateful for ordinary things, always wanting, more, and the perfection, as she refers to it as. She's got a saying that if you want to be happy, stop trying to be perfect. And that I totally 100% agree with. So it's something you have to be aware of when you're working with clients, and check yourself for it as well. Like I've given you my definition of happiness. I believe personally, in order for me to be happy, well, I've got to basically be making progress. I got to be satisfied. I have to be content. I don't have to be perfect. To me, it's in no way, shape, or form about being perfect. It's about making consistent progress. Like you've also would have heard me say many times, it's all about progress, not perfection. But again, it's something to be aware of in yourself and when you're working with others. Because again, a lot of times it's just a shield that people are putting up. So she's got another saying, she talked about it there as well. We're all so busy chasing the extraordinary that we forget to stop and be grateful for the ordinary. And I agree with that. Again, social media is a perfect example. Everybody with their images that they're posting up in the stories that they're telling, for the most part. Again, be grateful for the ordinary. Gratitude, she talked about gratitude there. And again, we talk about gratitude a lot, but I like the way she presented it there. That especially, for just the ordinary things, be grateful for the ordinary things. And when we can only be grateful for the extraordinary, well, I do think that's a dangerous place to be in. I think we need to be grateful on a daily, consistent basis for the simplest of things. Things don't have to be perfect to be grateful. And be aware of it. Awareness is such an important tool that we have. And that's by taking time each and every day to focus on these things, and to make sure that we're balanced and to live with purpose. That really does play a major role in being grateful for ordinary things. It doesn't always have to be extraordinary. And again, there's no joy without gratitude. Everything kind of stems from the negative, but as far as feeling vulnerable, but again, you can't have joy without that vulnerability, and you can't have joy without being grateful. So make sure that you're taking time, and I know I've talked to many of you have your gratitude journals. It's part of your personal growth that you're doing on a daily basis, and that's amazing, that's great. But just make sure you're doing it consistently. Be grateful for the smallest of things. Again, if you want to be happy, if you want to be satisfied, if you want to be content, you want to have joy in your life, well, you have to be grateful. It all starts with that gratitude. So, but vulnerability, we've got our key areas. I'd say, well, it affects all of them. Feeling vulnerable can affect each and every one, whether it be health, whether it be growth, whether it be your finances, but definitely in the area of relationships. I mean, if you think about it, and not in just, obviously it does, like with your intimate relationships, definitely. You have to be vulnerable to put yourself out there, to walk up and approach somebody, to go ahead and try to make up with maybe your spouse or your partner or your significant other. Maybe you've been hurt in the past and you don't want to put yourself out there again. But without that feeling of vulnerability, well, you're going to have a very challenging time going ahead and creating those lasting, meaningful relationships. But even with yourself, your relationship with yourself, there's always a risk. You have to feel vulnerable to a degree, because you have to do certain things in order to go ahead to have that good, strong self-image with yourself, to have that positive relationship with yourself. So getting comfortable with feeling vulnerable is a very strong tool to have. And again, through the power of repetition, reminding yourself, it's not a weakness. And again, I'm not saying that all of you struggle. I'm sure there's many of you that don't struggle with this at all. And I'm envious of you. But I know there's a lot of you that do struggle with it. And I guarantee you, if you don't struggle with it, I guarantee you'll be working with people that do. So be aware of it. But again, with the relationships, you can't have the joy of these loving, lasting, meaningful relationships in your life without putting yourself out there, without the risk. And that's primarily what feeling vulnerable is. It's experience the risk of being rejected, or in some way a negative response when you put yourself out there. And again, not just with a partner or somebody romantically that you're interested in, but in any, whether it be in business, whether it be with a friend, whether it be with a group of colleagues or coworkers, or whoever the case may be, you're always putting yourself out there, and there's always a risk of rejection, which means you're going to experience being vulnerable. But just remember the other side of that. Remember the rewards, because she's right when she talks about that. All positive emotions, joy, love, every positive emotion that you could possibly ever have, all comes from vulnerability. Staying vulnerable is a risk we all have to take if we want to connect, if we want to experience that feeling of connection. Again, you can't connect with somebody without the fear of being rejected, being vulnerable. So again, especially in the relationships, it plays a major role with relationships, but in all the areas, there's always some form of vulnerability. A sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is all about your relationships with yourself. And again, that should be number one on your list. But again, sometimes you're going to feel, you have to put yourself out there. You're going to experience some form of rejection, of fear, of discomfort, but that's okay. That's a positive thing. But again, be aware of it within yourself and definitely be aware of it with your clients. But even in the area of your health and your fitness, if, say for an example, and this is something I know about, if you're not in great shape, you have to go to the gym, you make a decision, you're going to start exercising. You feel vulnerable going to the gym because you know people are judging you. Not everybody, obviously. A lot of people really, I mean, they admire you for having the courage to do it. But I know myself, when I first started going to the gym many years ago, when I started this, and I was in horrible shape. I was, like I say, 45 pounds, probably heavier than I am right now. I hadn't exercised in most of my life. Well, maybe when I was young I did, but I hadn't for many, many years, put it that way. And I remember that so well, going to the gym, signing up that first time and going to work out and having to get on the treadmill. And I remember being on the treadmill and thinking, oh God, everyone's looking at me. I can't quit after just a minute or two. I have to, go as long as I can because, again, all in my head. I'm sure nobody was watching me. But in my mind, I felt that discomfort. I felt vulnerable as far as what people were thinking, what people were judging. And again, it's probably what kept me from doing it for a long time. But again, so just be aware when you're working with people. If you don't experience, you might be in amazing health. But a lot of times somebody you're working with, maybe, they're very hesitant. Don't just always be telling them, hey, you need to get to the gym, you need to do this. There could be a very good reason. Maybe they're linking up pain. Remember the whole thing about pain and pleasure. They're linking up massive amount of pain to go into that gym, not because they're lazy, not because, primarily they just don't want to exercise, but maybe they just feel like they're being judged and they don't want to do it. So try to work with them, try to come up with solutions, but not just with weight issues, with any type of health challenges. There's always that risk, always, the possibility that the individual is avoiding it only because they feel vulnerable. Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. And that is the truth. You feel very vulnerable though when you do show up sometimes, and others are seeing you. You feel like you're being judged. So again, be aware of it with others. Be aware of it with those clients that you're working with, and even finances. Finances might be different as far as, okay, maybe, well, first off, you could be feeling like you're being judged. But a lot of times, well, people just avoid it because, again, they do feel very vulnerable because it's a big risk to take, to start trying to learn how to invest, trying to learn how to generate additional revenue streams, to go ahead and change your spending habits. But again, they could feel vulnerable. And it's a negative emotion. But again, try to relay it to the person in such a way to get them to try to shift their focus from the pain, the negative experience that they're going to feel, to some pleasure that they're going to experience, that they're not going to have that pleasure without working through that negative emotion. The opposite of scarcity, it's not abundance. It's just having enough. Be grateful for having enough. It's a starting point. A lot of times people, especially with finances, they've experienced scarcity for so long. And when they start to take action, they want to right away, go from, barely squeaking by to being in debt. They get frustrated. They want to have that abundance. And again, this is only talking about finances. It applies to all the areas, abundance of joy and love in the relationships or growth or whatever the case may be. But specifically here talking about with finances. So again, just encourage people. You don't have to go from scarcity to abundance in short periods of time. It's all about that progress. Focus on just improvement, getting enough to pay your bills, getting enough to have a little bit of security in your life, having enough, that if of a bit of emergency fund off to the side. So if something does happen, and start to build on it from there. Again, you don't have to go from scarcity to abundance in 30 days. But probably the best saying that she has, but what makes you vulnerable also makes you beautiful. And I believe that, and again, it's something that I personally, I struggled with and I still do to this day, but I'm trying to work on it. I'm trying to be very aware of it at all times. It's not a form of weakness. And again, I know maybe many of you don't, but the reason I'm focusing on this today is because I know some of your clients are. So look, other than that, the short enough session today, a little bit shorter than what we normally do, but hopefully you got some value out of it. Hopefully you got something that you can incorporate into your own life, and again, through with your clients as well. So other than that, we're going to wrap it up, guys. Next week we'll be back. Hopefully, I think I'll be back in Ireland next week. I still haven't booked anything. I don't know for sure. I'm going to wait until the weekend and make a decision, but I'm thinking I'm coming back on Sunday. But again, I'm going to see what goes on here anyway. So look, thanks everybody again. Always appreciate the turnout. I'll go ahead. I'll get this edited. I'll get it posted. So other than that, hope all is well, and we will see you all soon. Thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.